the beginning of the tourist season, and it's entirely tourist-oriented business with huge motels built on its, on beach fronts, and a very popular place. In any case, we went through town, and I noticed quite a few for rent, for sale, signs for lease. And I noticed quite a few of the places that we had visited before were uninhabited. As we went through town and got to the far end, and we went to this Mexican restaurant, my basic estimation offhand from this one drive straight through town without pausing to look or slowing down, even just as we drove by, I estimated that since I was there last, not even 2 years ago, approximately a year and a half ago, that between 20 to 40% of the businesses that were there at my last visit were now defunct. That is, the buildings were empty, the storefronts were empty, the equipment had been removed from many of these places. Other places had businesses which were for sale but hadn't been operated for a long while, yet had the equipment, tables, chairs were on top of tables. And you could just see all this through one pass through town, one pass. And as we went home, it was dark. And, of course, I couldn't tell anything more, but that the town was more empty than ever before. It has its local population, but generally it would be a bustling place full of tourists, shopping away as much, vigorously everywhere. So a day or two later, I grabbed my camera and walked into town and made a careful tour up both sides and down both sides of the main street, and took a few tours off side blocks and whatnot. And it wasn't very long before I discovered that I had terribly underestimated the evident catastrophe. I no sooner left the house, we're one block off Main Street, well out of town, and there's a motel on the corner. Not only was it empty, but some of the larger buildings were even closed up. Obviously, no one had even opened the rooms for a long time. It looked like they'd closed it down. It wasn't even heated. There was a couple of cars in the parking lot there, is all. And this is actually the case across much of the western half of the country, which I travel. There are many motels that I've passed many times over the last 5 years, which I've never seen a car in the parking lot, but one car, which was obviously the person that worked there, the only person there. But I began to walk down the street, and on the right hand side would have been this little takeout place where you could get Mexican food, and it's closed down. I go further on down the street, and it's just business after business that's not just closed down, but we have the ones that are still open for business. Most of them had closed signs in their windows. Others that were still open. Prominent things, signs are just pervade the whole picture. You had buildings that hadn't been kept up for many years. I mean, these are signs of long-term, not just neglect, but, well, inability, probably, to afford to keep up buildings. We have huge tarps with tires all over roofs, prominently displayed and apparent. Empty parking lots. A sign off in the corner says for sale. It's sort of inconspicuous, you know. There's a welcome sign in the door, but the door is locked. You peer in the window and you see very, very, very disturbing things. You see, I saw something more prominently on this trip. I've probably seen a few cases of this, you know, over the last few years. But there was something more prominent. I went to the next town and the next town and several other towns and took pictures and did surveys as well. And I saw the same thing. This disturbing thing is there were mattresses laying on the floor in a shop, a business. And there would be no blankets on the mattresses. There would be child's toys scattered over them. There would be signs that people had been living there, maybe making meals on an old Coleman stove or making coffee, and that's it, and they're gone. I got through town and it was just amazing, these pictures. I mean, because if you squint your eyes and you don't think, well, you know, the traffic isn't what it used to be, and there's not people, you know, crowds going up and down the sidewalks, and you know, and whatnot, and you think, well, you know, a little cold today, you know, people are staying in, you know, maybe nothing abnormal about it. But there, right on your side, would be, you know, a number of shops in a relatively large building, and the pizza place, you'd thought you might have wanted to try it, and you know, there was a delicatessen next door, and whatever, you know, on and on. Store, every one of them vacant. Every one of them vacant at the peak business time, or the beginning of the peak business time for the year. Every one of them vacant, for rent, for lease. It said in every window of this big building. The building itself has got a big for sale sign on the end of it, which of course you don't see as it's exposed to the street. But on the end there's a big real estate sign prominently displaying that it's for sale. Huge motel right behind it, also for sale. Not a car in the parking lot. I mean hundreds of rooms and not a car there. Not one car there. There's many motels all around which are in the same condition. They've built some new motels on the beach, and some of those have a moderate amount of business. There's some, you know, shares that type arrangements that, you know, are well occupied. Those are generally people who are relatively very well off. And they're not impacting business in town, of course, because, well, to be blunt, by the time I got to the end of town, there was at least areas where probably not 20 to 40%, but probably more so around 75%, 80% of the businesses were just gone, defunct. Even if they were open, there was business for sale by owner. they would make, financial arrangements. In other words, they would carry the paper at your risk of surviving these conditions, which they weren't doing themselves. So this, coupled with the the obvious fact that, in their last days of hoping to survive this undeclared depression, these people had even lived in their businesses before. Whatever happened to them, I have no idea. They're nowhere to be found. The next town down from us, the other direction, I went down there, and it was even in worse condition. Not only had people given up hope, they were actually gutting there was people actually gutting the insides of businesses. That is, taking down the light fixtures to salvage them for whatever reasons. I even found what appeared to be banks. There was no signs, that had been long defunct, teller windows and all that hadn't seen use for many years. And all this is like, it's like piling up worse. Not only is it a huge number of businesses that are defunct, but what happens next is the landlord uses it for storage, and he starts, they start putting their junk in there. There's a corner that is an awning, and there's a boat stored there because it gets it out of the weather a little bit. And why they're doing that, you have no idea, because it's a losing battle. Everything you study is a matter of a losing battle. The boat hasn't been used for years. It's just going to hell in a handbag. They've stored it under this corner of this building, which makes the whole business, it's a sign in front of the business that says, "We don't even hope to recover." That's what it's saying. We do not even hope to recover. And this is our issue here. It is not difficult for us to understand that we suffer this big word. It's too big a word to go and look it up in the dictionary, that it might mean something to you if you can't intuit what it means. An obfuscation of the currency. It's confused into a falsified debt to a banking system which no more than publishes our promissory obligations to each other, claiming their debts to the bank, which gives up no lawful consideration. Indeed, the peripheral banks, quote, borrow, unquote, the money, unquote, from the central bank. But in truth, that's the publisher of the currency. There's your obfuscator of the currency. They're the ones who, without giving up any lawful consideration, and you know this because we never get any lawful consideration from the central banking system, and they obfuscate this mere publication of our promissory obligations to each other into a falsified debt to the central bank, upon which they charge interest, which Griffin doesn't dare mention in his pathetic, so-called second look at the Federal Reserve. He doesn't even explain it. He's claiming to have discovered it, and he can't even explain it. He's claiming to have discovered new things. He doesn't necessarily. That's one of the only new things in the book. So, it would have to be one of these his claimed discoveries. And it's just so incredible, because what does he advocate? Not being a discoverer, and It's hard to say this in any way which doesn't just seem terribly, terribly derogatory.